Welcome to your storytelling. Enjoy the stories and don't forget to subscribe. I thought I knew my husband. For 10 years, I trusted him, loved him, built a life with him. We had routines, inside jokes, memories. Then one night, everything shattered. It started with a phone buzzing at midnight. Not mine, his. He always kept his phone close, but that night, he was in the shower. The name on the screen wasn't familiar, just initials. I hesitated, then picked it up. Can't wait to see you again. Same time tomorrow? My heart pounded. I stared at the message, my mind racing. Was this a mistake? A wrong number? I wanted to believe it. But the way he guarded that phone, the way he never let it out of his sight, I knew. Something was wrong. I put the phone back, my hands shaking. When he walked out, towel wrapped around his waist, I smiled. Pretended nothing happened. But inside, something had cracked. And once a crack starts, it only gets bigger. I thought I knew my husband. For 10 years, I trusted him, loved him, built a life with him. We had routines, inside jokes, memories. Then one night, everything shattered. It started with a phone buzzing at midnight. Not mine, his. He always kept his phone close, but that night, he was in the shower. The name on the screen wasn't familiar, just initials. I hesitated, then picked it up. Can't wait to see you again. Same time tomorrow? My heart pounded. I stared at the message, my mind racing. Was this a mistake? A wrong number? I wanted to believe it. But the way he guarded that phone, the way he never let it out of his sight, I knew. Something was wrong. I put the phone back, my hands shaking. When he walked out, towel wrapped around his waist, I smiled. Pretended nothing happened. But inside, something had cracked. And once a crack starts, it only gets bigger. I barely slept that night. My mind kept replaying the message, dissecting every word. Can't wait to see you again. It wasn't just a one-time thing. Same time tomorrow. A routine. A secret life, hidden from me. My husband's breath was slow and steady beside me, oblivious. I wanted to wake him up, shove the phone in his face, demand an answer. But I didn't. Instead, I waited, watched. In the morning, he kissed my forehead like always, murmured something about an early meeting, and left. The moment the door clicked shut, I grabbed his laptop, his drawers, anything that could hold a clue. Nothing. He was careful. Too careful. I checked his phone again, but he had deleted the message. My stomach churned. He knew I'd seen it. He was covering his tracks. My hands trembled as I gripped the phone. I whispered to myself, I will find out the truth. And no matter what it was, I would be ready. I followed him that evening. It felt surreal, like I had stepped into someone else's life. I wasn't the kind of woman who snooped, who spied on her husband like some paranoid wife in a bad thriller. But here I was, tailing his car through dimly lit streets, my pulse hammering. He didn't go to the office. I knew it before I even saw the turn he made. Instead, he pulled into a hotel parking lot. A nice one. Too nice for a casual work meeting. I watched from my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. He stepped out, straightened his jacket, and checked his phone. Then, as if sensing something, he glanced around. I ducked, heart racing. My mind screamed at me to leave, to stop before I saw something I couldn't take back. But I stayed. Minutes passed. Then, the door of the hotel lobby swung open. A figure emerged. Tall, confident. And when I saw his face, my blood ran cold. It was my husband. I blinked, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. My husband was standing there, perfectly still, but he was also inside the hotel. How? A twin? A clone? My heart pounded as I clutched the dashboard, my breath coming in short gasps. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. The second man, his twin, walked toward my husband. There was no handshake, no awkward hesitation. Instead, my husband, stepped closer. And then, to my horror, they kissed. My stomach twisted violently. I slapped a hand over my mouth to stop the gasp from escaping. My mind shattered into a million pieces. This wasn't an affair with another woman. This was something else, something I never could have imagined. The kiss wasn't friendly. It was deep, familiar, full of something I couldn't comprehend. I was frozen, watching my entire marriage collapse in front of me. Who was this man? And why had my husband hidden him from me? I didn't remember driving home. My hands trembled on the wheel, my vision blurred. My husband had been lying to me, but not in the way I had thought. This wasn't some ordinary affair. It was something much worse, something deliberate, something secret. And the worst part? He had hidden himself from me. I sat in our dark kitchen for hours, my phone in front of me, debating whether to call him. What would I even say? I know about your secret twin? I saw you kissing yourself? It sounded insane. When he finally came home, he was normal, casual. He kissed my cheek and asked about my day, completely unaware of the storm inside me. I searched his face for any sign of guilt, any hint of the man I had seen outside that hotel. But there was nothing. For the first time in my marriage, I looked at my husband and realized I didn't know him at all. The next morning, I woke up with one mission: find out who this twin was. If my husband wasn't going to tell me, I'd find out myself. I scoured our house, searching for anything. Old photographs, documents, anything that hinted at another brother. Nothing. It was as if this man had never existed. That sent a fresh wave of panic through me. If he was a twin, there should be something. But my husband had erased him. Desperate, I called my mother-in-law. She had always been warm to me, but today, there was a tightness in her voice when I asked about my husband's childhood. "Oh, honey, you know your husband doesn't like talking about the past," she said lightly, but there was something forced about it. "Did he ever have a brother?" I asked carefully. Silence. A long, heavy silence. Then, in a quiet, trembling voice, she whispered, "Oh, dear. He never told you?" My hands went clammy around the phone. My heart pounded. Told me what? Another long pause. I heard her take a shaky breath. "He has a twin," she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Or, he had one. We don't talk about him anymore." A chill ran down my spine. "Why not?" She hesitated again. "Because," she exhaled sharply, as if making a decision. "Because he wasn't right. He was dangerous." The room spun. Dangerous? The man I saw didn't look dangerous. He looked just like my husband. But then I remembered the way he had smiled. The way he kissed my husband, confident, like he had won something. My mother-in-law's voice cut through my thoughts. "Listen to me," she said, her voice firm now. "If he's back, you need to be very, very careful." I swallowed hard, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. I had uncovered the truth. But suddenly, I wished I hadn't. I barely heard my mother-in-law's voice after that. My mind was spinning. Dangerous? That wasn't the word I expected. A secret twin? A forbidden affair? I could handle that. But dangerous changed everything. "I don't understand," I finally whispered. "What did he do?" She hesitated. "Your husband. He was the golden boy. Smart. Kind. But his twin, he was different. Troubled. When they were young, he hurt things." My blood ran cold. Hurt things. He had a darkness in him. We tried to love him. But one night, when they were 16, something happened. Something terrible. And after that, we never spoke of him again. I gripped the phone. "What did he do?" Another long silence. "I can't say," she whispered. "But your husband knows." A click. The line went dead. I sat there, my heart pounding. I had uncovered a secret, but I had a feeling the worst was yet to come. I confronted my husband that night. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Tell me about your twin." He froze. The way his body stiffened, the way his jaw clenched, I knew, in that moment, that he had been expecting this. "I don't have a twin," he said flatly. "Don't lie to me." My voice wavered, but I stood firm. "I saw him." His eyes flickered, a flash of something unreadable. Then he turned away, running a hand through his hair. "Whatever you think you saw, you're wrong." I grabbed his arm. "No, I'm not. I saw you. At the hotel. Kissing him." My voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell me?" He exhaled slowly, looking up at the ceiling like he was searching for patience. Then, finally, he said, "Because if I told you, you'd leave me." Something cold twisted in my stomach. "What did he do?" I whispered. He stared at me. Then, in a hollow voice, he said, "You don't want to know." That night, I lay in bed beside my husband, but it felt like there was an ocean between us. I had seen the truth with my own eyes. His twin existed. And not only that, my husband had been hiding him from me. I couldn't stop thinking about my mother-in-law's words. Dangerous. He hurt things. What had she meant? I waited until my husband's breathing slowed. Then I slipped out of bed, took his phone, and locked myself in the bathroom. My fingers trembled as I opened his messages. Most were work-related. Normal. Then I found the hidden folder. My breath hitched. Dozens of messages. All from one number. "I miss you. You can't ignore me forever. She doesn't deserve you. You know that. I waited 10 years for you." My heart hammered. Then, at the very bottom, the last message. "If she finds out the truth, I'll have to make her disappear." Just like before. The phone slipped from my hands. I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. Make her disappear? Just like before? What did that mean? Who was he talking about? I needed answers. Now, I stormed back into the bedroom, flipping on the light. My husband groaned, shielding his eyes. "What the hell?" I threw the phone at him. "Explain." His eyes darted to the screen, and for the first time, I saw real fear in them. He sat up slowly. "Where did you find this?" "Don't play dumb," I snapped. Who was he talking about? Who did he make disappear? He exhaled, rubbing his face. Then, in a low voice, he said, "My high school girlfriend." The room spun. She went missing, he admitted. And the last person seen with her was my twin. A chill crawled up my spine. My husband swallowed hard. And now, I think he's back to finish what he started. I wanted to scream, to cry, to run. But I was frozen in place, my breath shallow. "You're telling me," I said slowly, "that your twin might be a murderer?" He ran a hand down his face. "I don't know if he did it." "Then why did your mother call him dangerous?" My voice rose. "Why was he erased from your life?" He hesitated. Then, softly, "Because my parents were afraid of him." I grabbed the bedpost to steady myself. Jesus Christ. My husband looked at me then, his eyes dark, heavy with something I couldn't name. "I should have told you." "Damn right you should have." My voice trembled. "But instead, you hit him. You kissed him. Are you in love with him?" Silence. It was the worst silence of my life. Then, softly, he said, "I don't know." And that was when I realized this wasn't just about an affair. This was about obsession, about possession, and I was caught in the middle. I felt like I couldn't breathe. His words kept echoing in my head. I don't know. He didn't know if he loved his twin, if what they had was love, obsession, or something even darker. I had spent years thinking I was married to one man, but now I realized I had been living in the shadow of another, a man I never knew existed. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My husband exhaled shakily. "I don't know." Wrong answer. I stepped back. "You don't get to not know right now. Because your brother is dangerous, and he's here. He's been watching us. He wants you, and I don't think he cares what happens to me." His face twisted in pain. "I would never let him hurt you." I scoffed. "Like you stopped him before?" His silence was answer enough. I turned toward the door. I needed space. I needed to think. But as I reached for the handle, a soft knock echoed from the other side. My body went rigid. It was almost midnight. Who would be knocking? I turned to my husband. He was already on his feet, his entire body tense. He knew. Another knock. Slow. Rhythmic. I backed away. "Don't open it." But he was already moving. "Wait." I grabbed his wrist, but he shook me off, his face pale. My heart pounded as he unlocked the door. It swung open, and there he was, his twin. My breath caught. Seeing them side by side was unsettling. They were identical, down to the sharp jawline, the piercing eyes. But there was something in the twin's smile, a slowness, a knowing, like he had already won. "Brother," the twin said softly. My husband swallowed. "You shouldn't be here." The twin's eyes flickered to me. His smile widened. "Oh, but I had to be." Then, taking a step forward, he whispered, She needed to meet me properly. I felt like a trapped animal. My husband was frozen, his twin standing in the doorway like a shadow. I should have met you sooner, the twin said, tilting his head as he studied me. You're even prettier up close. My skin crawled. I stepped back, but he followed, slow and deliberate. My husband blocked his path. Don't. The twin smiled, still so protective, just like when we were kids. His gaze darkened. But you couldn't protect her, could you? My husband flinched. I saw the way his fists clenched, the way his breath quickened. The twin turned back to me. Did he tell you? He asked, eyes gleaming. About the girl who disappeared? My stomach twisted. She didn't disappear. His voice was soft, almost playful. She ran. She was going to tell people about me. I felt sick. And you know what happened? His eyes locked onto mine. She never made it. A wave of nausea hit me. My knees wobbled, but I refused to fall. You killed her, I whispered. The twin smirked. I didn't say that, but I could see it in his eyes. He was enjoying this. My husband's voice was hoarse. You need to leave. The twin sighed dramatically. After all this time, that's all you have to say? He leaned in. You kissed me, remember? My breath hitched. My husband's jaw tightened. The twin chuckled. She doesn't know, does she? His gaze slid back to me. How long it's been. How many times you came back to me. My stomach dropped. I turned to my husband, my voice shaking. Tell me he's lying. Silence. The twin grinned. He never stopped loving me. I let out a shaky breath. This is insane. The twin took another step forward. Oh, sweetheart, he whispered. You have no idea how deep this goes. I needed to get out, away from both of them. But the twin moved first, stepping inside, closing the door behind him. My pulse spiked. My husband didn't stop him. You've been lying to her for so long. The twin mused, circling me like a predator. Maybe it's time she knows everything. I forced myself to stand tall. Then tell me. The twin's smile widened. Oh, I like her, he murmured. She's brave. I could barely hear over the pounding in my ears. She thinks you betrayed her with just a kiss. The twin continued, looking at my husband. Should I tell her about the rest? My husband's face darkened. Enough. Or what? The twin taunted. You'll hit me? Like when we were kids. I took a shaky step back. How long? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The twin turned to me, a wicked gleam in his eyes. Since the very beginning, the room spun. My husband reached for me. It's not what you think. I flinched away. It's exactly what I think. The twin chuckled. Oh, this is fun. But I wasn't playing anymore. I felt like I was drowning. My husband, the man I loved, had been keeping this from me since the beginning. How could you? My voice was raw, my hands shaking. How could you lie to me for years? His lips parted, but the twin laughed softly. Oh, sweetheart, do you really think you were his first choice? A sharp pain stabbed through my chest. He was mine long before you, the twin murmured, stepping closer. He just tried to bury me. Pretend I didn't exist. He leaned in, but he always came back. I turned to my husband, praying, begging, for him to deny it, but his eyes held nothing but guilt. I swallowed hard. You told me you loved me. I do, he whispered. The twin smirked. He loves me more. My world shattered, and then the twin's voice dropped to a whisper. And now, my love, I have to decide what to do with you. A cold shiver ran down my spine. What to do with me? I glanced at my husband, waiting for him to step in, to protect me, to say something. But he looked frozen, torn. I realized, with sickening horror, that he wasn't just afraid of his twin. He was drawn to him. The twin smiled, slow and deliberate. You see, I never liked sharing, he said. And you, darling, are in the way. I took a step back, my heartbeat hammering. You wouldn't hurt me, I whispered, trying to convince myself as much as him. His smile deepened. Wouldn't I? I turned to my husband. Stop this. His hands clenched into fists, his jaw tight. Brother, he said, voice strained. Please. The twin exhaled dramatically. Fine, he said. I won't kill her. His eyes flicked to me. Yet, terror clawed at my throat. I needed to get out. Now. But the door was blocked. And the worst part? My husband wasn't trying to stop him. Panic gripped me. My own husband wouldn't protect me. I backed away, my mind racing. Think. The twin watched me like a cat watching a mouse. Do you know why I loved him first? He murmured. Because we're the same. You only ever had half of him. But I? He reached out and brushed my husband's arm, making him shudder. I have all of him. I snapped. You're sick. The twin just grinned. And you're in my way. My stomach dropped. Before I could move, he lunged. I barely ducked as his hand shot out. I ran, heart racing, darting around the furniture. My husband finally reacted, grabbing his twin's arm. Stop it. The twin's eyes darkened. You'd fight for her? A tense silence. Then the twin smirked. Guess I'll have to make it easier for you. And then, he reached into his pocket. Something glinted. A knife. My blood turned to ice. I didn't think. I just ran. My feet barely touched the floor as I sprinted for the kitchen. My only thought, get a weapon, get something. Behind me, I heard the scuffle. My husband shouting. The twin laughing. I yanked open a drawer, my hands scrambling for anything sharp. A knife. A heavy pan. Something to defend myself. A shadow loomed behind me. I spun just as the twin lunged. The knife in his hand sliced through the air. I barely dodged, my back slamming into the counter. The pain was sharp, but I forced myself to move, to fight. I swung a pan at him. He dodged, laughing. Feisty, he mused. I like that. Terror gripped me. Then, out of nowhere, my husband tackled him. They crashed to the ground, the knife skidding across the floor. I could barely breathe. For the first time, I saw my husband's face twist with something other than fear. Rage. But I didn't know who he was angry at, his brother, or me. They fought like animals. Years of tension, rage, secrets exploding all at once. Fists flew. Bodies slammed. The floor shook beneath them. I should have run. I wanted to run, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. Then, the knife. It lay just inches from my feet. The twin saw it first. He lunged. So did I. Our hands collided. A struggle. His fingers clamped around my wrist, yanking me forward. I screamed. My husband grabbed him, pulling him back, and suddenly, the knife was in my hands. Time slowed. The twin smirked. You won't do it, he whispered. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. He leaned in. You're not a killer. My grip tightened. He chuckled. But I am. And then, he moved. My instincts took over. The knife plunged forward, and everything went still. The twin gasped, his eyes widening in shock. For a moment, it felt like time stood still. The knife was buried in his side. His hand hovered over the wound, the blood already staining his shirt. I pulled away, my breath ragged, my hands trembling. My body was shaking, still in the aftermath of the struggle. The twin stumbled back, a pained chuckle escaping his lips. You, he grinned through gritted teeth. You really did it. I stood frozen, my mind a blur. I had hurt him. I didn't know if he would live or die. My husband's face was ashen. He stared at the twin, at me, his expression unreadable. No. The twin snarled, his anger flaring as he clutched his side. This is your fault, you know. My husband's eyes darkened. I didn't want this, but I couldn't stop myself from staring at the twin. What are you going to do? Kill me? The twin's lips curled. Oh, sweetheart, it was never about killing you. It was about owning both of you. The room was silent except for his labored breathing. Then, slowly, he slid to the ground. I was trapped in a nightmare. My heart raced, my pulse thundering in my ears. The twin was lying on the floor, bleeding out, and I had no idea what would happen next. My hands were still shaking, the knife in my grip feeling too heavy, too wrong. What have I done? I whispered to myself, unable to tear my eyes from the blood pooling beneath the twin's body. My husband stepped forward, his voice hoarse. We need to call an ambulance. I shook my head, still unable to fully process what was happening. He might die. I know. My husband's voice cracked. He kneeled beside his twin, looking down at the wound. But this isn't the way it should end. I felt the heat rise in my chest. You let this happen. You let him tear us apart. Don't you think I know that? His words were sharp, pained. I never wanted this, ever. The twin let out a weak laugh. Too bad. You're stuck with me now. My stomach churned. But the words that followed froze me in place. You should have killed me when you had the chance. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. I stared at the twin, his blood staining the floor, his body twitching in pain. What kind of person was he? What had he become? Please, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Just stop. The twin chuckled weakly. It's too late for that. His hand gripped my husband's arm, pulling him closer. It's always been too late. My husband's expression darkened, a flicker of regret in his eyes. He reached for the phone, his fingers shaking as he dialed. But the twin stopped him, his grip tightening. You know what I want. His voice was low, almost pleading. You can't fix this. My husband froze, his face pale. I don't know how. You don't, the twin rasped. But she does. My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't breathe. The air was thick with tension, with fear. What does that mean? I asked, barely able to form the words. The twin's eyes locked onto mine. You've always had a choice, darling. But now, he paused, grinning painfully. Now, you'll have to decide. Do you want him, or do you want me? I staggered back, the weight of the decision hitting me like a ton of bricks. What was he asking me? What kind of choice was this? But before I could process it, my husband looked up, his face ashen. We need to save him. No, my voice was firm, my chest tightening. He's not worth saving. The twin's eyes gleamed. Oh, sweetheart, it's not about worth. It's about who you choose. I wanted to scream, to run far away, but I was paralyzed. My husband gripped the twin's hand, tears welling in his eyes. Please, he begged. I can't lose you again. The twin smirked weakly, his breath shallow. Too late. I could see my husband falling apart, but something in me hardened. You're not going to make me choose. My voice was steady, even if my heart was shattering. The twin's eyes narrowed. But you already have. I turned away, unable to look at either of them. The tension in the room was suffocating. My hands were still shaking, my mind racing through every twisted possibility. How had we ended up here? How had it come to this point? But then the twins' words rang in my head. You've always had a choice. I didn't know if that was true, but in that moment, I needed it to be. I grabbed my phone and dialed the police. My hands were unsteady, my heart pounding in my chest. Hello? Yes, there's been an emergency, I said, my voice shaking. We need help. There's been a stabbing. The operator's calm voice came through, asking for details. I gave them quickly, my words clipped. Then I hung up, looking at my husband, who was still kneeling beside the twin. His face was full of guilt, of anguish, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort him. The twin's smirk was fading, his breathing shallow, but he wasn't done yet. You'll regret this, he whispered. Both of you. And I wasn't sure if that was a threat or a promise. I could hear the sirens wailing in the distance, but my heart was still racing, my pulse loud in my ears. My husband was still kneeling beside his twin, looking helpless, and the twin's smirk was slowly fading, replaced by a grimace of pain. I could feel the tension in the air, thick, suffocating. My entire body was on edge, but I couldn't make myself move. I didn't want to look at them. I wanted to escape. But how could I? How long until they get here? I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. My husband looked up, his eyes red. Not long. Not long. The twin's voice was ragged, and though he was on the floor, there was a certain arrogance still in his tone. You really think they can save me? My husband didn't answer. Instead, he turned to look at me, as if searching for something in my eyes. A way out, maybe. But all I saw in him was guilt, confusion, and desperation. I didn't want this, he said, his voice breaking. But it didn't matter. The twins' blood was on our hands, and I wasn't sure how I could live with that. The sirens grew louder, and I felt the weight of my choices pressing down on me. I had made the call. I had brought the authorities into this. There was no going back now. My hands were still trembling, the phone call still echoing in my mind. I thought I had made the right choice, but now I wasn't so sure. I looked down at the twin, whose eyes were now half-lidded. He was losing consciousness. Was I saving him by calling the police, or was I sealing my fate? The twin's voice broke through my thoughts. "You really think you can get away from this, don't you?" he rasped. I looked at him, coldly. "What do you mean? You think you can just wash your hands clean?" he said, struggling to sit up. "But it doesn't work like that. You're in this now. All of us are." My heart dropped. I had hoped, prayed, that the police would come, that they would fix this. But now I realized I was tangled in this mess, just as much as they were. The twin's smirk returned, and I shuddered. The sound of the sirens was deafening now, but it didn't feel like relief. It felt like the beginning of something worse. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I turned to my husband, but he was already staring at the twin, his face filled with regret. "I didn't want it to go this far," he whispered, as if trying to explain himself. "You never wanted it to go this far." I shot back, my voice sharp. "But it did." The twin coughed weakly, his lips twisting into another painful smile. "He never had a choice, sweetheart." "Not really." I looked at my husband, my anger boiling over. "What does that mean?" "You never had a choice," the twin murmured. "Not since the moment you met him." My stomach twisted. The sirens were almost here, but now I felt like we were just waiting for the inevitable. The twins' words lingered in the air. I couldn't escape them. The police arrived, but the moment they stepped into the room, everything shifted. They froze, eyes wide as they took in the scene. My husband kneeling over the twin, the blood everywhere. I didn't know what to say. "Ma'am, what happened?" one of the officers asked, his voice calm but firm. I opened my mouth, but no words came. I didn't know where to start. How could I explain any of this? "He attacked her," my husband said suddenly, his voice shaking. "He tried to." He paused, looking at me. "He tried to kill her." The twin chuckled weakly. "Oh, he's a liar." The officer stepped forward. "We'll need to take a statement from both of you." I shook my head, my mind still spinning. The room was too cold. I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of everything that had happened. The twin laughed again, louder this time. "You're all in this now. I'm not the only one who's guilty." The next few hours felt like a blur. The police questioned us. They took the twin away, his condition critical, but they assured us he'd survive. My husband and I were left in the living room, the silence between us more suffocating than ever. I could barely look at him. "What did he mean?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "About us being guilty?" My husband's face was drawn, his eyes hollow. "I don't know." "You don't know?" I snapped, my voice rising. "You have to know. What else is there? Why didn't you ever tell me about him?" His eyes filled with tears. "Because I never thought he would come back." "But he did," I said quietly. "And now, everything has changed." I wanted to run, to leave. But something kept me here, something that anchored me to this place. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe it was just the truth that I couldn't outrun. The hours after the police left were the worst. The silence in the house was unbearable. I didn't know what to do, what to say. My mind was still reeling, my emotions torn in every direction. I wanted to confront my husband, demand answers, but every time I looked at him, I saw a man who had been lying to me for years. "I never wanted this," my husband whispered, his voice trembling as he sat across from me. "You keep saying that," I snapped. "But you never did anything to stop it, did you?" His face crumpled in pain. I didn't know how. I couldn't. I stood up, pacing the room, my mind in turmoil. "How long were you planning on hiding him from me? How long were you going to let him destroy us?" "I didn't want to destroy anything," he pleaded. "But I couldn't just erase him." "I'm not asking you to," I said bitterly. "I just wanted the truth." He dropped his head in shame, and I felt something inside me break. It felt like everything was falling apart. My trust in him shattered, and I was left standing in the wreckage of what used to be my life. I could feel the tension thick in the air between us. We hadn't touched each other since the night everything fell apart. Not even a word of comfort. It was as if the space between us had become a chasm too deep to cross. "I loved you," I said softly, my voice breaking. My husband looked up, his eyes filled with guilt. "And I loved you. But you didn't love me enough," I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. "You didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth." He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. "No more excuses." I stepped toward the window, staring out into the night. The world outside seemed so distant, so far away from the chaos in my heart. What was I supposed to do now? How was I supposed to move forward after everything? I didn't have the answers. I wasn't sure I even wanted to try anymore. The next few days were a blur. The house was quiet, eerily so. I couldn't bring myself to go back to work, to pretend like everything was normal. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the twins' bleeding form, his words echoing in my mind. "You're all in this now." The weight of his words pressed heavily on me. "I had a choice," he said. A choice that I hadn't even realized I made. But what was that choice? Was I complicit in this? Was I responsible for what happened? The more I thought about it, the more I felt like I was suffocating in a prison of my own making. I tried to reach out to my husband, but he was distant, lost in his own thoughts. He wouldn't talk to me. Not about the twin. Not about anything. And every time I tried to ask him something, it felt like I was just digging deeper into a hole I couldn't escape. The phone rang, breaking the silence. I picked it up hesitantly, my heart pounding. It was the hospital. "They've stabilized him," the nurse said, her voice calm. "But his condition is critical. We'll need to monitor him closely." I swallowed hard, my stomach twisting. Is he going to make it?" The nurse paused. "We can't say for certain. It's too soon to tell." I hung up, the weight of the news settling like a stone in my chest. What did it mean if he survived? What if he came back? What if he was stronger, angrier? I turned to my husband, whose face was blank, unreadable. "He's alive," I said softly. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. There was no way to hide from the truth now. Days passed, and the tension in the house grew unbearable. My husband and I barely spoke, and when we did, it was like talking to a stranger. The twin was still in critical condition, his fate hanging in the balance. But even with him unconscious, it felt like his presence was everywhere. I couldn't escape him. I went through the motions of daily life, eating, showering, sleeping, but it felt like everything had lost its meaning. I tried to push the thoughts of the twin out of my mind, but they wouldn't go away. Every time I looked at my husband, I saw the guilt in his eyes. I saw the betrayal, and I couldn't pretend I didn't feel it too. I needed to make a decision. I needed to decide if I was going to stay in this broken, toxic relationship or leave it behind. But every time I thought about walking away, something inside me twisted. What would I do without him? What would I do without them? It was a restless night. My mind wouldn't stop racing, and every creak of the house, every shift in the shadows, felt like it was holding some sinister secret. I couldn't escape the feeling that something was going to happen. I glanced over at my husband, lying next to me, but it felt like we were oceans apart. His breathing was shallow, uneven. He was awake, too, but we didn't speak. There were so many questions I had, so many things I needed to know, but I couldn't bring myself to ask them. What was I supposed to say? How could I fix this? I had always prided myself on being strong, on being able to handle anything life threw at me. But now I was broken. It felt like every step I took brought me deeper into the abyss. I could feel myself falling, and I had no idea how to stop it. I closed my eyes, hoping for sleep, but instead, all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat. The next morning, I decided I couldn't keep living like this. I got up early, before my husband was awake, and slipped out of the house. I needed to clear my head. I walked aimlessly, my feet carrying me without purpose. My thoughts were a jumble of confusion, anger, and fear. I didn't know if I could forgive him. I didn't know if I wanted to. The truth was, I didn't even know if I wanted him anymore. I had spent years building my life with him, believing in our future, believing in our love. But now it felt like everything had been a lie. How could he keep such a huge part of his life hidden from me? How could he have let it all spiral so far out of control? I found myself standing outside a cafe, staring at my reflection in the window. For the first time in a long while, I didn't recognize the person looking back at me. Who was I anymore? I didn't return home until late in the afternoon. By then, my husband had gone out. I wasn't sure where he went, and frankly, I didn't care. I went into the bedroom and started packing. I didn't know where I would go, but I knew I couldn't stay here any longer. The house felt suffocating, like it was closing in on me. I thought of all the years we had spent together and how everything I thought I knew had been turned upside down. I had to leave. I had to get away from him, from the twin, from all of it. I was about to pick up my bag when I heard the door creak open behind me. I turned around, and my heart skipped a beat. It was my husband, standing in the doorway, his eyes hollow, filled with something I couldn't place. He stepped inside the room, his movements slow, deliberate. I stood frozen, my heart racing. There was something in the way he looked at me that made my breath catch in my throat. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice breaking. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't find the words. He took another step toward me. "I've been thinking about everything. About us. I didn't realize how much I had hurt you." The guilt in his voice made me feel even more suffocated. I shook my head. "It's too late for apologies, isn't it?" He reached for me, but I stepped back. "You don't get to just fix this with words." His face twisted in pain. "I know I don't. But I need you to know that I never wanted any of this. You don't get to decide what I need." I snapped, my voice rising. "You've already taken too much from me." I felt my chest tighten. My mind was spinning with anger, with hurt, with confusion. But still, something in me wavered. I couldn't fully shut him out. Part of me still cared, despite everything. He stood there, eyes pleading, his face filled with regret. But all I could think about was how far we had fallen. I had given him everything. I had trusted him with my heart, with my life. And in return, he had betrayed me. "You should have told me about him," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I didn't know how," he admitted, his tone soft, almost broken. "I didn't know how to explain, to tell you about my past about him. I thought I could keep it buried forever. And look where that got us," I said bitterly. "You can't keep running from the truth." "I know," he said, tears welling in his eyes. "I know." I felt the anger rising inside me again, but it was mixed with something else, something that made my heart ache. "I don't know what to do anymore," I whispered. He stepped closer, his voice low and desperate. "You don't have to decide now, but don't leave. Not like this. Please." I didn't know what to say. The air between us felt charged, filled with too much emotion, too many unsaid things. But in that moment, I realized, no matter what I decided, nothing would ever be the same again. The silence between us was unbearable, thick and heavy. I could see the pain in my husband's eyes, the sorrow and regret. But I couldn't let myself be swayed by his tears, not anymore. I had been his wife for years, and yet I was standing in front of a stranger. I crossed my arms over my chest, trying to protect myself from the vulnerability that threatened to pour out. "I can't keep pretending that everything's okay." His face fell, the hope in his eyes quickly vanishing. "I'm not asking you to pretend. I'm asking you to stay." "I don't know if I can," I whispered. The truth felt like a weight in my throat. He stepped forward, cautiously, as if afraid of pushing me further away. "We can work through this. We can fix it together." "Fix it?" I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "How do you fix something so broken?" He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand to stop him. "I don't want false promises anymore. I want the truth." And the truth was, I wasn't sure if we could ever come back from this. I walked away, not knowing where I was going. My feet carried me, but my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. I couldn't stay in that house. I couldn't stay in a place where I didn't recognize myself anymore. Every room felt haunted. Every corner felt like a reminder of the man I thought I knew, and the man I was still trying to understand. I needed space. I needed to think. I found myself outside, standing in the park we used to visit together. It was quiet, peaceful, but all I could feel was the turmoil inside me. What do I want? That was the question I couldn't answer. I couldn't decide if I wanted to fix things or if I was already too far gone to care. I thought about the twin, his twisted role in all of this, and the more I thought about him, the more I realized just how much I still didn't understand. I didn't know if the truth would set me free or if it would trap me even more. The phone call came when I least expected it. It was the hospital again. I froze, my heart thudding in my chest. My hands shook as I answered. "Ma'am." The nurse's voice was gentle, but there was an urgency there that sent a chill down my spine. "We need you to come in. Your husband's brother. He's asking for you." I could feel my world tilt. "He's awake?" I asked, barely able to get the words out. "Yes, ma'am. He's stable for now, but he's requesting to speak with you." I closed my eyes, the weight of the situation crashing down on me. I didn't know if I was ready for this. I didn't know if I could face him, but something in me couldn't ignore the call. I hung up the phone, taking a shaky breath. This was it, the moment that would change everything. The hospital room was cold, sterile, and quiet, except for the steady beeping of the machines. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him. The twin, my husband's brother, was lying in the bed, his face pale and bruised. His eyes were open, but there was a coldness to them that made me shiver. He looked like my husband, but the resemblance was eerie, unsettling. He glanced up at me, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of recognition. Then, a smile twisted onto his lips, but it was cruel, almost mocking. "You came," he said hoarsely. "How touching." I stepped into the room, my heart pounding in my chest. "What do you want?" He chuckled weakly, his hand reaching for the 4 in his arm. "I think you know what I want." I crossed my arms, glaring at him. "You want to ruin everything, don't you?" He smirked. "Oh, sweetheart, it's already ruined." I took a step back, the reality of what he had said sinking in. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "The truth is a powerful thing," he said slowly, "and when it's revealed, there's no going back." The words hung in the air like a dark cloud, suffocating me with their weight. I stood there, paralyzed, unable to move or speak. The twin's eyes bore into me, calculating, as if he could see straight through me. "Your husband. He's always been afraid of me," he said, his voice eerily calm. "He knew I'd destroy everything he built if I ever came back. But now, I'm here, and there's nothing he can do to stop it." I felt a chill run down my spine. The way he said it, so casually, made it clear that he had planned this, planned everything. I tried to push the fear aside. "You've already hurt enough people. What else do you want from me?" He chuckled darkly. "Oh, I don't want anything from you. But I'm sure your husband will have plenty to say once he finds out what I've done." I took a step toward him, my anger rising. "What are you threatening him with?" "Let's just say," the twin said, a sinister glint in his eyes, "the past has a way of catching up with you." The weight of his words crushed me. The twin's calm demeanor only added to the fear gnawing at my insides. "You can't just play with people's lives like this," I said, my voice trembling despite my attempt to stay composed. His lips curled into a grin, like he was savoring every moment of my distress. "You really think he's the good guy in all of this?" he asked, his tone mocking. "You think he's innocent?" I didn't answer immediately, but his words lingered in my mind. The more I thought about it, the more I wondered. Was my husband truly the victim here, or was he just as guilty as his twin? "Tell me what you want," I demanded, trying to steady my breathing. His smile faltered, and for a brief moment, his eyes darkened. "What I want doesn't matter. What matters is what you will do once you realize the truth about him." I swallowed hard. The fear that had been buried deep inside me was starting to surface again. What was the truth? What had my husband been hiding all these years? I stood there, frozen, as the twins' words echoed in my mind. I could feel my stomach twist in knots, and my heart hammered in my chest. What truth? I finally managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. The twin leaned forward in the bed, his gaze unwavering. "The truth about your husband's past. The things he's done. The things he's kept hidden from you." "I don't want to hear any more lies," I said sharply, shaking my head. "If you're trying to manipulate me, it's not going to work." The twin's expression darkened, and he chuckled darkly. You think he's the good guy here? You think he's the man you thought you knew? Think again. I felt a chill spread through my body as a terrible thought crossed my mind. What if he was right? What if everything I knew about my husband was a lie? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I couldn't let him get to me. Not now. Not when everything was already falling apart. I couldn't sleep that night. My mind was a storm of doubt, confusion, and fear. Every time I closed my eyes, the twins' words played on a loop in my head. What had my husband done? I knew he was hiding something. I had suspected it for years, but the truth? It was something I hadn't been prepared for. I got out of bed, my mind racing, and paced the darkened room. The silence was deafening, and every creak of the house seemed to mock me. I thought about calling him, but something stopped me. Maybe I was afraid of what I'd hear. Maybe I was afraid of confronting him again. After what felt like hours, I picked up the phone and dialed his number. It rang, and I held my breath. Finally, he answered. His voice was groggy, as if he had just woken up. What is it? I need to talk to you, I said, trying to sound calm, but my voice cracked. There was a long pause on the other end. About what? He asked, sounding distant. I squeezed my eyes shut, feeling the weight of everything crashing down on me. About the truth. He came home a few hours later, his face drawn, eyes tired, as if he hadn't slept. He walked into the living room, his gaze wary. You've been speaking to him, haven't you? He asked, his voice low. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I studied him, trying to find the man I had once loved, the man who had been my partner, my confidant. I need you to tell me everything, I said, my voice trembling but firm. I need to know the truth about your brother. About you. He flinched, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for a way out. I told you everything, he said quickly. You don't need to know anything more. It's over now. Don't lie to me, I said, stepping closer to him. I've seen the way he looks at me, the things he said. You're hiding something. You've always been hiding something. I didn't want to hurt you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I never wanted you to find out. But now, he trailed off, looking lost. Now it's too late for secrets, I said, feeling the final threads of my trust snap. He sat down, his head in his hands, as if the weight of everything was finally starting to crush him. I didn't think he'd ever come back, he murmured, his voice breaking. I didn't think you'd ever have to know about him. I crossed my arms, trying to hold it together. Who is he, really? What's the connection? He looked up at me, his eyes filled with pain. He's my twin brother, the one I lost years ago. I thought he was dead. I didn't know what would happen if he ever found me. I didn't know how to explain it to you. A cold shock ran through me. A twin? How could you not tell me about this? I whispered, my voice trembling with disbelief. How could you keep something so important from me? I didn't want to ruin everything, he said, his face twisted in regret. I thought if I kept him in the past, everything would stay normal. I never wanted him to show up, to bring chaos into our lives. But he's already here, I said, my voice cold, my heart heavy with the realization of just how much had been hidden from me. And now, there was no turning back. I sat there in silence, trying to process everything he had just said. His words felt like a blur, the revelation of a twin brother only adding to the chaos in my mind. How long were you planning on keeping this from me? I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. I didn't know how, he said quietly. How could I explain something like this? How could I tell you about him after everything we've been through? I stood up, my hands shaking. You should have told me from the start. I should have known about him. We should have known about him. He looked down at the floor, his face a mask of guilt. I know, but it was complicated. I didn't want to drag you into it. You've already dragged me into it, I snapped. You've dragged me into a mess of lies, deceit, and now, him. He flinched at the mention of his twin, as if hearing his name out loud brought a sense of dread. You don't understand, he said, his voice breaking. He's dangerous. He's always been dangerous. You don't know what he's capable of. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. What does that mean? What exactly are you hiding from me? His eyes darkened as he stared at the floor, as if gathering the strength to say something he had kept buried for so long. He wasn't always like this. When we were younger, he was different. But something changed in him. He became violent, unpredictable. And when he disappeared, I thought it was a blessing. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The man I had been married to, the man I thought I knew, had a twin brother who sounded like a monster. So you just let me. I stopped myself, unable to finish the sentence. The words felt too heavy. I didn't know what to do, he admitted. I couldn't protect you from him. I couldn't protect myself. I didn't want him to come back and tear apart everything I had built. But he's here now, I said bitterly, feeling the weight of his confession. And all the walls you built are crumbling. He looked up at me, his face desperate. You don't understand. He's not here because of me. He's here because of you. You're the one he's after. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. He's after me? Why? I whispered, barely able to get the word out. He wants you, my husband said, his voice shaking with fear. He wants you for himself. The chill in the room was palpable as the gravity of his words sank in. The man I thought I had loved, the man I thought I understood, had a dark secret that I couldn't escape. Why would he want me? I asked, my voice barely audible. What's the connection between me and him? He's obsessed with you, my husband said quietly. I don't know why, but he is. It's always been you, even before you and I got married. The confession sent a wave of nausea through me. This was a nightmare, a twisted game I had unknowingly become part of. How could you let this happen? I asked, my anger rising again. How could you stand by and let him come after me like this? I didn't want this. I didn't want him to find us, he said, his face filled with regret. But he's been watching you, watching us. I felt a cold shiver crawl up my spine as I realized how much danger I was in. He wasn't just an estranged brother anymore. He was a threat, a dangerous, obsessed man who had been lying in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. I'm going to fix this, I said, my voice shaky but determined. I'm not going to let him destroy everything. The next few days were a blur of confusion and fear. I couldn't focus on anything except the looming presence of the twin. The more I thought about him, the more I realized how little I knew about his past, his motives, and how deep his obsession with me truly ran. I spent hours researching, digging into anything I could find about him. My heart sank as I uncovered more about the twisted history between the two brothers. There were rumors, whispered stories about violence, betrayal, and a history of manipulation that went back years. The twin was a master of control. He had manipulated everyone around him, including my husband, into believing he was dead. I was starting to realize how little I actually knew about the man I had married. How much of our life had been built on lies and half-truths. And now, I was caught in the middle of it all. I needed answers, and I needed to face him head-on. But I didn't know if I was ready. I met with a private investigator, someone I had hired to track down the twins' past. It wasn't easy, but after weeks of digging, we had finally found a lead. The twin had been involved in a series of violent incidents, but every trail seemed to go cold. The investigator handed me a folder filled with documents and photographs, all showing pieces of a life I didn't even know existed. He's more dangerous than you realize, the investigator warned. He's not just obsessed with you. He's calculating. He has a plan. And he'll do anything to get what he wants. My stomach churned as I flipped through the photos, each one showing a different version of him. Charming, manipulative, dangerous. I looked up at the investigator, my mind racing. What should I do? He hesitated. Get out of town. Leave with your husband. Get somewhere safe. Because once he's found you, he won't stop. The words hit me hard. I wasn't safe anymore. No one was. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Leave town? Hide. The investigator's advice seemed so simple, yet I knew it wasn't. I couldn't just run away. I had to confront this. I had to know everything. I can't leave, I said, the weight of it pressing down on me. I can't live in fear. Not anymore. The investigator nodded solemnly. It's your choice. But if you do stay, you have to be ready. He won't stop until he gets what he wants. I left the office feeling more lost than before. How had my life turned into this? A twisted web of lies, deceit, and obsession. When I got home, my husband was waiting for me, his face pale and his eyes filled with regret. "I'm sorry," he said softly, but the words were hollow. "I should have told you everything from the beginning." I couldn't look at him. I was so angry, so hurt. "You've lied to me for years. You've hidden this from me. How am I supposed to believe anything you say now?" He stepped forward, reaching out to touch my arm. "I love you. Please, don't leave me." I yanked my arm away, the hurt too raw to ignore. "How can I stay when I don't even know who you are anymore?" That night, as I lay in bed, the sound of the wind outside was the only thing I could focus on. My thoughts were a whirlwind of fear, anger, and disbelief. My husband's twin was out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I knew I couldn't keep running. I had to face this head on. The next morning, I made up my mind. I was going to confront the twin, and I was going to do it alone. It wasn't about running away anymore. It was about taking control of my life again. I told my husband that I was going to meet him. He begged me not to go, but I couldn't listen. This wasn't just his mess to clean up anymore. It was mine too. When I arrived at the address the investigator had given me, I felt my heart race. The door opened, and there he was. The twin, standing before me, that same cold smile on his face. "You finally came," he said, his voice smooth and predatory. "Why?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "Why all of this? What do you want from me?" He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving mine. "What do I want? I want everything. I've spent my life in his shadow. But with you, I don't have to be. You'll choose me." The words sent a chill through me, and for a moment, I didn't know what to do. Was he insane? Had he lost touch with reality? "You don't own me," I said, finally finding my voice. "You can't manipulate me like this." He chuckled darkly. "You think you have a choice? You think you can walk away from this?" I felt a surge of courage I didn't know I had. I wasn't going to let him control me any longer. "I'm not afraid of you." In that moment, everything changed. The power shifted. He wasn't the threat. He was just a man, weak, deluded. "You can't have me," I said, stepping back. "You've lost." His eyes narrowed in rage. "You'll regret this." I turned and walked away, not looking back. I didn't need to. I had taken control of my life again.